Broden, welcome to the Living Covenant podcast and thank you for coming. I know you've been in a busy season lately, so appreciate you giving the time.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for our conversation today, but do you want to tell us, just so people get a little bit of a picture as to who you are and what your life looks like, what has been keeping you busy in this season of life?
Sure. I'm currently serving as a pastor over in WA. I was at Livingston Church in Perth, but recently I've gone all the way down the bottom of WA to a little place called Esperance. So I'm serving there as the pastor and also looking after the school in a chaplaincy role. So,
Esperance is supposed to be quite beautiful, right?
oh, it's gorgeous. Do you think you're walking into like a Disney movie or something? Is that crazy?
Amazing. So you are, aside from being an Esperance, you are pastoring and you are a chaplain. I understand you're also a little bit of an Instagram influencer as of late. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I am. And it's beginning to become a bit bizarre, especially like just recently, for instance, I went back to Perth, and I had like some young fella come up to me and want to chat, and he's like, "Hey man, I follow you," and like it's happening more and more. So much so that even when I drove back from Perth to Esperance, like we stopped in this little, I don't know what it was, but it's like a little not a milk bar, but it's kind of like a servo thing anyway. So I was getting the kids some lunch, and some random worker guy in there was like, "Hey mate, are you on TikTok and Instagram?" And I was just like, "What the?" Like, because we're out the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. You even got the blue tick of approval, so that says something.
Wow.
You're legit.
Anybody can get that. Anybody can get that.
Tell us about what you've been doing on there, because you've been pretty open about a part of your life on there, which I imagine isn't an easy thing to do. But what kind of inspired you to get on social media in more of a intentional way, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with saying this. Very often in our church, especially as Adventists, I feel like there can be a bit of a stigma in how we should behave on social media. And I do believe, we still need to be good Christians and we still need to hold up Christian morale and all that sort of thing. But often I think in a lot of minds, people think unless I'm like preaching Jesus continually, or I'm sharing Bible verses, or I'm doing things like that, I can't be an influencer, or I can't be this person of influence. And I actually disagree with that very much. So I think one of the greatest things people can do is actually be that presence online in all different areas, whether it's maybe you like drawing, or maybe you're a good singer, or I don't know, whatever your creative outlet is that you excel in, share that. And that's what I do. But I'm doing it through weight loss. And I'm just being open and transparent on the struggles of being my size. But I guess the edge where it comes in is I'm not quiet about being a pastor. And I think it's the place that a lot of Christians connect with.
I think that's really cool. I think you're right. There is this kind of, it is encouraged to go on social media and share your faith and, share your devotional time and all this. But like you're saying, what's not often encouraged is just sharing the messy, real, raw parts of your life. And
there's a quote from a little old lady who said, "The most powerful thing a Christian can do is to be a loving and lovable Christian." And I think that whatever it is you share online, as long as you are a desirable person, you are doing a work for the kingdom. And I would love to see that stressed a lot more to our young people, the people that want to use social media.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's this idea in social psychology. It's called the pratfall effect. And it's this idea that you're actually more likable, not when you're perfect, but when you're able to laugh at your mistakes or laugh at your failures or be open about your lack of perfectionism and so on. And I think that's so true, because it's not often the people who are perfect who we admire. It's the people who are honest or who give things a go, or, are resilient with things even when it's difficult. And yeah, I think that's probably something we we are afraid of showing as Christians in the online space. Like you're saying, we try to show this perfect life and this perfect faith and everything, which sometimes is probably hard to relate to for people on the outskirts.
Yeah, totally. I think one of our problems that we have as humans is how much we care about what people think. And I think that's the space, like even knowing what you just said, like, and going, oh, as long as I'm being authentic and I'm showing the sides of me that aren't perfect, people will like me more. But there's still a part of you that cares what others are going to say, even though it's going to bring in a lot more love. And that's a space that I've wrestled with a lot. I had a mentor once say to me, though, he said, Broden, no matter what you do in life, you're going to be judged. He said, you could be feeding the homeless on the street. Someone's going to judge you and make out like you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And he said, it doesn't matter what it is. You're going to get judged. So do what makes you happy. And I'm not going to go right into it, but I had a bit of a health scare. It was a neurological condition that I had where half my body would go numb and stuff. But anyway, I actually lost the ability to speak. I got something, what they call aphasia, where even though you think you're saying things right, it's coming out all weird.
Interesting.
Very scary time because I haven't had speech, which I know we all do, but especially me doing what I do. And yeah, I feel like coming out of that, it was almost like, it felt like a slap to the face. And it was kind of like, man, life is short. Live it. And that's kind of what has brought about this journey.
Yeah, awesome. One thing I noticed as I was looking at your page was that you've like invited people quite a bit to ask you questions, but you specifically say, be respectful and I'll be honest, which is awesome. I think it's also frustrating that has to be said because I guess you would hope that respect would just be a human baseline. But you talk about in your article that you kind of experienced this judgment or you've experienced this throughout your life. Not necessarily on social media, not necessarily out in the streets or at the server or whatever, but actually more so in the church. And, you've talked about and you mentioned already that you're a pastor for a church that prioritizes or upholds the health message. So what has that been like to kind of stand in that middle ground? How has that been for you? What has your experience been like there?
Look, it has been probably one of the biggest struggles that I think I've experienced. Hence why I wrote what I wrote when I do tell people to ask me questions and I say, but be respectful. Purely because I get a lot of people that also struggle with health that come into that space. And I want to create a community where people are respected and are safe. And it kind of weeds out the people that don't want to be. Yeah. And I think when it comes to my experience in the church, I've had people ask me what I weigh before asking me my name. And these are vegan, and this individual was a vegan, staunch health message people in the church. But they came at me straight away rather than shaking my hand and saying hi. And I was visiting this place. As a matter of fact, while we were coming over here for this appointment, I entered into a church, sat down, and my wife was next to me. And a man tapped on her shoulder and said, "Is your husband a sumo wrestler?" And then she turned around and just gave him a look. My wife's very lovely, but she's not afraid to speak her mind either. And then he tapped again and he goes, "Oh, he's a big boy." And he just can't, he wouldn't stop. But the point is, I've been met with this. To the point where I've also had an individual say something when I was preaching up the front. He said to one of my friends, he didn't realize he was my friend, but he said to him, "Oh, that guy should be ashamed to be up the front representing Jesus looking like that." So I've had a lot of hurtful things come my way. Look, just to keep it short, I'm not going to lie, I kind of now feel sorry for people like that.
Yeah, it touches on something that I think we'll probably get to later on, this idea, I suppose, of like the sins that are external versus hidden. In your article, you talk about how it all kind of comes down to this one thing, which is labels, essentially. which, you know, we all do all the time. Sometimes we don't realize we're doing it. Sometimes, yeah, we don't realize the effects that it's having on people. But how have those labels affected you? And what are some of the labels maybe that we typically will throw on people that maybe we don't realize are having such a big effect?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of subconscious level labels that we do. It's very broad, but it can come into skin color, it can come
Yeah.
into gender, it can come into one's looks, whether maybe it's a haircut that they've got. And you think, oh, he's got a dirty big mullet, like he must be a bit of a bogan. Or maybe it's an individual coming in covered in tattoos, or maybe they've got piercings. We put labels on everyone straight away. And I mean, because this is psychology, this is just how it is. We typically make a judgment on somebody within the first 5 to 10 seconds of seeing them. That's what we do. It's a human thing. And I think for me, my weight is obviously the first thing that people say. So that's where the label comes. But here's the thing too that is rough, is that we also have subconscious labels that we place on ourselves. And we often focus on, oh, we should treat this person that way or this person that way, and not based on labels that we see them. But I think sometimes the stronger voice in terms of the labeling can actually come from within towards yourself.
Yeah.
And that was something that I struggled with the most for a very long time.
I guess it's hard to, yeah, for sure. When you have positive beliefs about yourself, the opinions of others don't seem to matter so much. But when you kind of believe those yourself, and then they say, that is when it hits you.
Yeah. And, you know, it hit me when I was sitting down with my kids, and my youngest, he struggles. Not terribly or anything, but like he was just going through a season where, he thought, oh, I'm not smart, I'm not clever, and I'm not this. And I remember I was sitting there and I was saying to him, I'm like, you can't say that about yourself. And I'm like, just because you're like this now, like, be kind to yourself, you know. And like literally, I came out of that and I kind of had a bit of an epiphany, and I'm just like, wow, I can't sit there and say that to my kids, and when I'm alone, just beat myself up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Model the behavior. Yeah. Well, the individual that you chose to write about in this series, which people should know by the title of the episode, is Rahab. And I'm always curious to know why people chose them. I know you talk about Rahab as having some labels. Was that the first thing that drew you to, I guess, exploring and unpacking and writing about her story, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think so. I was raised in a very conservative church, beautiful people, love them to bits, still very close with them, and I still have a big heart for that place. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that I was raised with, though, that I've looked back on now, and I just think, oh, that was a little missed the mark a little bit. And so I also am a very big fan of grace and the idea of grace. I'm a big fan of the idea of improving in life and God doing a work in us and making us new. But grace has to be like lifted up, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that her story models that so well. And then when you look at the context and you look at her life and who she was, because I wasn't a prostitute, praise the Lord. I was a drug addict and I was in trouble with the law back before I became a Christian. And I've lived outside, and I know what it's like to be an outcast or to be looked at as maybe the scum of society. So that's why I picked her.
Yeah. When you say you're a big fan of grace, is that something that you've always been a big fan of, or was there a moment in your life where you kind of realized something or heard something that helped you see it in a different light? Because I think we all probably would say like, oh yeah, grace is awesome, all for grace. But what helped you get to that point of being like, yeah, grace, that's what it's all about?
So being raised in the country, I took a lot of a lot of my learning came from very conservative American theologians, and it's what I grew up with, and it's what I knew. And actually, once I started getting out of the country and away from just people that all thought the same way, I got exposed to different ideas and different ways of looking at things. And like, well, no, let's reason through this. Let's make sense of this. And I come to realize just how closed-minded I was as an individual, and how I was so sure that what I believed was right. I was so judgmental. I'm very ashamed to admit it, but I was so judgmental. I was judgmental of, I looked at men and women as very different, which we are. We are very different biologically, but in terms of what a woman can do and what a man can do, I looked at, it wasn't just that though. It went beyond discussions that happened about church politics. Do you know what I mean? The way that I viewed the health message was I was very strict on myself. There was a lot that I held on to, and there was a lot that I guess you could say I was very unhappy. I didn't know it at the time, though. That's the thing. And I think that's the illusion that happens when you're doing it. I thought things were good, and I thought that this was where I was meant to be. But then, I'm so much happier now. And so I think when it comes to Achan and, oh, sorry, we didn't talk about Achan yet.
Okay, we'll get there. Or you can introduce him if you want.
Yeah, so because of how I was and the way that I was towards myself, the way that I viewed others, and when I really got to look at grace, when I looked at church history and looked at how Christians behave throughout the ages, and when I saw people doing things and living in ways that I looked at as terrible, which now I'm just like, come on, man, let's be realistic. Grace was a kind of a new concept because I didn't realize how works-based I was growing up. And so when I experienced grace, it freed me in ways that I had never experienced before. I thought I had experienced that freedom, and I still sung songs to Jesus, and I still praised him for the work that he was doing in my life. But when I truly experienced grace on a new level, I think I finally got what people died for.
Has that new understanding of grace also, I'm guessing it has, but I'd be curious to know how has it changed how you, or has it helped you stop put labels onto other people or judge them in certain ways? Like, has that transferred over in how you connect and relate with people?
Absolutely. 100% and times 10. I tell you why, because the first thing I do when I start judging someone, because I do it too, I probably do it every single day. But the moment I do it, I've got this little mantra, if you will, that I tell myself every time I do it. And I say, Broden, just remember what Jesus has forgiven you for. Pull your head in. You are in no position to cast shade on anyone. And that always sobers me up very, very fast because I try to be low-key about it. But, I've got a history.
Yeah. Well, let's look back at the history of Rahab, because I think a lot of the times when people hear or think of Rahab, typically the first thing they think of is prostitute. So they slap a label on her straight away, which I think she is introduced as the prostitute Rahab. So, you can't blame us too heavily. But tell us about some of the labels, like aside from that were placed on Rahab, and what was kind of like the context of those in her day and age.
Yeah. So I think it's no different to today in many ways. Even to the pagan, prostitution was still not a very respectable career path.
Sure.
So That's one thing. But then to bring in Israelite people who had this high expectation, high morale, we're not like them guys, them sorts of people. It was like a double fold in terms of negative outlook upon someone like her. So not only was she a pagan, a prostitute, but oh my days, my cat, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. It's great.
Okay.
Well, no, people might not even realize. I didn't notice till you said something. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop. I'm sorry.
Broden, I like that. I like that even on the cardboard box in the background, it says grace.
Oh, yeah.
Very on theme. Good job.
I know it is.
Right.
That was just a removalist.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. So you were saying the Israelites were kind of like, we're better than her sort of thing, or we're better than that.
Yeah.
I think let's kind of unpack Rahab's story a little bit. Let's refresh people's memory, just so they understand her story a little bit more.
Yeah. So Rahab belonged to a city, Jericho. I believe that her people were very... I've read a lot that they were connected to like the Philistine type thing, like a very similar type of people. But basically, the story goes that spies came in because God was going to give them this land where Jericho was. And then she took the spies in and she gave them safety when they were being hunted because they got caught out. And she was just straight up. She's like, we've all heard stories about what your God has done. He's separated the sea and he's done all these miracles and he's looked after you guys for so long. We all know that God is with you. And she admitted that everyone is freaking out. And she was just like, so I know you're going to come here and you're going to take over and I want to be with you guys when you do that. Like, I'm happy to change. And I mean, it's a very, very small number, I believe, that are in these lines of work that she was in that do it because they really want to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just all you can do. And I do believe that when she looked at an opportunity to make change, she was a wise woman. She took it.
I think that's the important thing to remember with anyone who we put labels on is there's usually a lot more to the story than we think. It's usually not just like, oh yeah, they just became a drug dealer or they just became a prostitute, or it's usually not as simple as that. But I think it's interesting when we look at who God chooses in the Bible, we see it's often usually not the people who you expect. It's usually not the priests who are doing everything right that God uses to bring about his mission. It's usually the people who are like deeply flawed, or they have these labels on them, or they're just unexpected. They're like kind of odd candidates. Why do you think that God chooses these individuals to do his work?
Yeah, honestly, sometimes I wonder why. I think at the end of the day, obviously, everyone that has been picked, that we know their story, they've pulled through and they've come through all right. But he uses broken people, and I think the reality is that we're all broken to an extent, and it's just that these individuals have labels. Like every single person in the Bible has labels, and I think at the end of the day, what this comes back to at the end of the day is heart posture. That's all it comes back to. I mean, take for example, and I don't mean to digress away from Rahab, but if we just for a minute look at David and we look at King Saul.
Yeah.
All right. Look at the actions of David. He lied. He lied to a guy who was very faithful to him, sent him in, murdered him, stole his wife. Text implies force there as well. And then there's the whole forgiveness thing, and David, heart after God's own. You know what I mean? And then you read about Saul, and yeah, Saul did a few things, but he just, left some cows and some sheep alive. And what I'm getting at is when you compare the two, I can tell you right now, in today's standards, who is more evil
Mm.
according to morals.
Mm.
But who did God show favor to?
Mm.
The one who had the right heart posture. So the person that I compare Rahab with is a guy named Achan, and they definitely had different heart posture.
Yeah, tell us about this guy, Achan. I believe it's Achan, actually. But tell us about this guy, because I've actually, before reading your story, I hadn't actually heard about him before.
Right.
So who is he?
Okay. Yep. So Achan or Achan, however you want to say it, I'm going to go with Achan. He basically was a man in God's people. He was part of the tribe of Judah. And this individual was there when the conquest took place, when Jericho's walls fell. And what actually happened is when that happened, God made it very clear to Joshua and his people. And he said, you haven't done the work here. You're not the reason why these walls have fallen. All you did was walk around. And he goes, so therefore, spoils of war, which was the thing back in those days, he said, the spoils of war don't go to you because you didn't do the work. They come to me and they go into my storehouse, my treasury. And so that's what was supposed to happen. But the story goes that this individual named Achan decided that, I might take some of the gold and some of the silver. And that robe looks mighty, mighty nice. And it would look very good on me. And so he decided to take that as well. And so the story goes, he dug a hole in the base of his tent and he hid the stolen goods. And he ended up getting found out. They cast lots. And unfortunately, because it's a bit of a horrid story, but not only did Achan lose his life, but his whole family was wiped from the line of Judah. They were taken out. Yeah.
Mm. And I believe he did confess eventually, but by that time it was a little too late, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's all it was it was actually a forced confession.
Mm.
Yeah. It wasn't something that he willingly really came out and said. Picture it like this. Joshua is standing there. You've got the 12 tribes of Israel there. And each time they cast lots, we're going to the tribe of Judah. Okay, so the other 11 are like, that's not us. Good. Because they're like, who's done this? Because God said, someone among you has stolen. And so they were trying to find who it was because no one was coming forward. So those other tribes are out, but then Judah's left. And then they would cast lots again, and they would be pulling. This is just how they did it. That's how God gave answers. And then it went all the way down to Achan's very family. And it was only then that he came out and he was like, yes, I've done it. It was me.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what you kind of get when you look at the story of Rahab and Achan, the biggest thing that you noticed was the difference in their heart postures.
Yes. Well, the thing that really connects their stories is the contrast. So we often, and I don't want to get too technical because this stuff is technical for the unlearned in this stuff, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
But we've got these things that we call parallels, like where we can go, like one example is like Moses is a classical guy that we look at parallels. So many things that he did were exactly what Jesus did, and there's just these Christ-like, we call them a type of Christ, right? There's a lot of parallels, but there's also contrasts, which, well, is basically the opposite. But they're still the same, but the opposite. And so Achan's story and Rahab's story is quite different, but they still meet up in contrast. I'll give you an example. Rahab hid spies under flaxseed, but then Achan hid stolen goods underneath his tent.
Yeah. Okay.
And because it all happens around the same story. The best thing that I found when I was actually looking into this, because I was noticing these connections, was the fact that Achan was in the tribe of Judah. And guess what tribe Rahab was grafted into?
The tribe
Judah.
of Judah.
Yes, good job.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I was like, oh, wow, like you can tell too the way that it's written that the writer definitely wanted you to make this connection, I believe.
That's really cool. I'd be curious to know how this whole, I guess, idea has impacted, I suppose, how you've invited people into things or your experience in the church. Because I guess my perspective is when you go to church or when you're in church leadership, we choose people based on the fact that they've agreed to the 28 fundamentals and been baptized and they live a good moral life, essentially. And we typically don't invite people into positions or serving roles if they were a prostitute or if they were a drug dealer or if they struggled with any sins in any way. So how do we be more like Jesus within the church in these situations or with people who are living in obvious sin? Like, what do we do? Because, there's obviously people who are in leadership as well who have, like you said, they're still sinners. They still have their things. So where do we kind of draw the line and how do we invite people into that space?
I think first thing that we need to acknowledge is that we also live in a society where, so for me, for instance, a very good example is the sin of gluttony, right? And, a guy my size, and it sounds horrible to say it, but yeah, I've struggled with gluttony, clearly. Like, I didn't get this way from fasting every week. But the thing is, society is set up in such a way that the food that we have, the pressures of life, people overeat. Like, we're known for it in the Western world. And so I guess the thing is, what makes that one acceptable? But then we look at somebody who maybe is living in a home outside of marriage, which is also in many ways a necessity for people to live, whether it's house sharing or whatever it is. But how do you navigate that? And I'm not going to lie, I don't have answers to that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions that I have. Like, why are we so strict on not eating a steak, but then we will fill our tables filled with sugar and cakes and all this stuff after a luncheon? Completely undoes those stir fries and grilled steaks that we ate at lunch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
we're
just
walking
think that these are
contradiction.
the conversations that we avoid that we just need to have. And it's just like, well, come on, let's be logical on this. But the church, a certain person said that there's things that we're going to have to learn, relearn, forget. And that is so true in life. And there's things that we as a church have down pat. But there's things that we need to revisit. And I'm in no way saying permit people with sin struggles and that and just like give a free card. That's not what I'm getting at. But at the same time, we do need to come from a place of grace. Jesus hung with sinners. He hanged out with them. That was his whole ministry. Yet how many Adventists are comfortable to sit around a few people that are having a beer? Not many.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think part of what you're also saying in your article is like this idea of bringing things to the light. And some people's things are in the light, they're in plain light. They don't need to be brought to the light. They're kind of obvious. And then other people's, they need to be brought because they're more hidden things. But I think that's obviously a difficult thing to do. And I would say probably for especially pastors, that's quite difficult because of the pedestal they're kind of on or because of the expectations that they have and because of the people looking up to them. And, they have certain standards that they're supposed to abide to. But I'd be curious to know because I guess you're someone who seems quite open about sharing, I guess, your things or bringing things to the light. Has that been something you've had to learn how to do over time with certain people? How have you gotten to that place where you feel comfortable, I guess, expressing things or bringing things to the light?
Yeah. Look, I think being a pastor doesn't mean that I've arrived. It just means that I'm trying to walk honestly. That's the way I kind of view it. And yeah, the elder or the deacon who's struggling with watching certain things on the internet that they shouldn't be can get away with something like that. Whereas a guy like me who wears this out openly to everybody, there's no hiding from it. But it's also the fact that there's no hiding from it that has forced me into a space where I need to look at this differently. And I just think that the struggle is so real when it comes to pastors, how we're perceived. In the Western cultures, I don't really think it's so much the pedestal. That's just my experience. Like the young, typical white Aussie guy is not going to come up to you being like, "Oh, pastor," you know what I mean? It's typically some guys from other countries where the pedestal is there. But the thing that is relevant, I find, is the expectation. The expectation isn't just hard on me, it's also hard on my family. And I literally just spoke to my church about this. I'm like, this life isn't bliss for us technically. I'm like, because all of you don't only just watch me, but you're watching my kids, you're watching my wife, you're watching how we behave. We've all heard those terms. That's not how a pastor's family should behave. Or that's not these are real pressures. Yeah.
So you mean like the expectation of what people expect you guys to be in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when looking at like the story of Rahab and Achan, I forgot his name. What is kind of like the thing that you hope people will remember and take away or wrestle with in looking at their story?
Yeah. I think there's a part of me that feels bad for Achan because I've also hidden to the place where it's not until I'm forced out. So in that sense, I can connect with him. But I think what these stories show is the contrast of forgiveness and righteousness and justice and, a lack of repentance. And so you've got this grace, justice kind of thing going on. And the thing that I love about them ultimately is that the cross tells us that mercy and justice aren't separate. As a matter of fact, they actually meet. And I think that what we need to take away from the idea of these two stories coming together is that it goes hand in hand. It shows you on one hand a God who is just, but so full of grace and mercy. Because, as the story goes, right, Rahab ended up becoming a direct descendant of Jesus.
It's great-great-grandma, right?
100%. How awesome is that?
Very cool.
To go from what Israel would consider, and it's amazing because Israel themselves missed this. Even in Jesus's day, they missed this sort of thing. And this woman who was down here was ultimately put up here. And all it wasn't because she was good. It wasn't because she didn't struggle and she wasn't human. It was because she came to the feet of Jesus and she opened herself to him. She opened up her heart. She confessed her faults. She showed that repentance. And that's evident in the fact that she ended up getting given what she got given. The danger is we've all got a little Achan in us.
Yeah.
That's the danger. Yeah. And so what I really wanted to do was challenge the reader to ask the question, first and foremost, what labels do you put on people? What labels do you put on yourself? And how strong is the Achan in you? Because Achan was part of the church, guys. He was part of the church. And he ended up being the one that didn't get the grace. Because it wasn't there for him, but because he ended up rejecting it. So where you are doesn't determine where you're going to be.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to land. We'll leave people with that thought of where is the Achan in you. No, much more than that. Yeah, thank you so much, Broden, for your vulnerability and for sharing your story and for writing for us. When Rahab, really enjoyed your thoughts, and I'm sure people will be blessed by it. So thank you again. For anyone who wants to read it, you can find it in the Living Covenant book or on the Record website. It's called Rahab, From Shame to Salvation.
Yes.